Okay, it's no problem to speak in English, but are there any English speakers in the place? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay, one. Well, that's worth the trouble. Okay. Good evening. Thanks for the introduction, Bieke. This is my first performance in the art school in Belgium, so it's a novelty. And well, without much further ado, let's get started. Okay. For a dreamy boy with a stamp collection and interest in comics and a strong interest in the physical world outside, I think it was a logical choice to become a student in geography, social geography to be more precise, after high school. And but as soon as I came to Utrecht University, I was supposed to learn everything about physical processes that shaped the face of the earth, like this. But I was very much distracted by this type of activity, because I became a volunteer as soon as I left my parents' home. And I became a volunteer at the Tivoli, which is like the Paradiso of Utrecht, a famous venue for pop and rock music, where a lot of famous bands perform and performed. And one of the first jobs as a volunteer, there was Monday night. I was supposed to glue these posters out on the streets of Utrecht to advertise the concerts that were taking place. We're talking about 86. So long before email and internet agendas, posters still played an active role in actually advertising what was going on in the city. So it had a practical purpose. And after a few years, it was necessary to choose a specialization within the geography department. And I always liked the generalistic aspect of geography. I didn't really know what to choose. But the cartography department seemed to offer the most field trips and field work and practica. So that's what I chose. And the diagram you see here is the vocabulary that you can use expressing yourself in the two-dimensional plane. It's from a French book from the 60s called Sémiologie graphique by Jacques Bertin. And what you see here, the vocabulary is direction, gray, grain, color, shape, and size. And I'm afraid that I'm still very much influenced by this diagram in the way I perceive graphics and graphic work. On the side, to subsidize my hobbies, I needed a job as a student. And I spent quite a lot of time in a place called a cartografisch laboratorium, which was basically a place where diagrams and maps were produced to illustrate scientific publications. And the stack of diagrams you see here were completely made manually with a rotring ink pen. And all these halftones needed to be cut from self-adhesive sheets of gray tones. A lot of work. But long before I ever considered to become involved in graphic design and graphic art, I really liked this technical work, you know, spending the day with my nose right on the light table. Also, this is the period of time that the computer was introduced. I started working with the first Apple Macintosh PCs. Gigabytes didn't exist back then. This is what my screen looked like at the time. A small black and white screen. I think it was a Classic or a Mac SA. Looks absolutely, I mean, if I think about the laptops that you guys are carrying around, you know, you're so accustomed to speed and connections and calculation power. It's a completely different world now. My parents never encouraged me to even think about a career in art and design. So from that academic world, for me it was a huge step to the world of art. I never even considered to go to art school, but slowly but steadily I thought that, you know, it would be possible to do something else after graduating from university. And that's how I got to become a student at the Rietveld Academie in Amsterdam. And I think it's a good school, not necessarily for everybody, because it's typically a school where they mess up your brain. You don't necessarily learn a lot of practical skills, but I think what's more important is that they teach you how to become a more independent thinker, and that's exactly what I needed at the time. So for me, I think it was worth the trouble of going there. And one of my teachers, Mieke Gerritsen, you may know her work, encouraged me to go in the direction of animation and programming and building websites. But at the time, the culture of printed ephemera was at its peak, flyer culture, like the posters, printed objects that could just be picked up in small boutiques and stuff like that, to announce activities like a roller disco in Amsterdam. And my classmate José worked at a gallery called W139, that's close to the red light district in Amsterdam. It's a place that's run by artists, where a designer called Bas Oud produced beautiful, delicate printed work, like these invitations. And especially when I came across this work from the 60s in the Stedelijk Museum, made by Emil Putman, who is somebody that can be regarded like the founding father of the private press movement in Holland, I decided that I wanted to dedicate my time to the production of print myself as well. And I think one of the most important things that I was exposed to in that period was an exhibition in Utrecht, in het Centraal Museum, of the work by a collective called Wild Plakken. And I wasn't only impressed by the sheer volume of the work, but more importantly, I was impressed by their the generosity in which they shared their working process. So each visitor could literally get a taste of what it was like to be in their studio, because there were these buckets with photographs you could browse through. They were very open about their working process, and I sure had some doubts if graphic design should really be what I, or if graphic design should be what I was going to do for the rest of my life. This really, and this show encouraged me to move on. At the Rietveld, being a student there, one of the most important things that I discovered was, and I think that's also a connection to cartography, is that this so-called neutral language of traffic signs and pictograms can also be regarded as a library of visual possibilities. And by taking everything apart and recombining it, it's possible to tell your own story. That was a huge eye-opener for me. Because as a cartographer, I already learned to work with vector lines. I'm very good at tracing stuff. So this fit the skills that I already had. And this is my first screen print ever. Not made at the Rietveld, but outside of the school. And the reason for that was that the people in charge of the workshop were very unwilling to support students, you know. They were very, if you would go there as a student and say, hey, can I print next week? The answer was usually, no, let's talk about it next week. And, you know, guys who only wanted to, you know, smoke cigarettes and drink coffee instead of helping students out to get stuff done. This all changed for the better when this man came to the Rietveld, Kees Maas, who brought a lot of experience because he has his own screen printing shop. He's an artist himself, and he has a lot of energy and a huge love for the screen printing technique. And I was really close to being to be a dropout, because I was kind of tired to be a student for such a long period of time. So in my last year I did an internship, and when I came back I decided to dedicate myself finally to the making of print. And I did a lot of experiments last 6 months. I learned a lot about technique, halftones, working with transparent colors. And to conclude that whole session, usually it's an honor granted to a graphic design student to design and produce the poster that announces the general final exam exhibition. And so there was a great way to conclude that final year. And after that I was completely hooked to screen printing, and I basically never stopped doing it. Especially when I talk or when I bring my work to the US, I bring my A0 sheets that I will unpack later. Often students cannot believe that it's actually screen printed because of the size. They think it's inkjet or a different technique. So I think it's important to show my working environment, that it's not exactly state of the art. There's no luxury. This is the place. This is Kees' studio in Amsterdam Noord. And as you can see, it looks a bit junky. There's no new tools, it's all second-hand. A lot of repair work done all the time. But all the ingredients fit together, so if you know what you're doing, it's perfectly possible to create high-quality results. And so there's only one table, one vacuum table. Most of the work that I've produced so far has been made on that one particular tool. There's 2 drying racks that take 75 sheets. There's a small area to mix ink. There's some storage space and, of course, exposure unit, lamp, etc. But that's it. And without knowing, I had come to the right place because Kees appeared to be somebody who had printed a lot of posters I'd seen in the previous years in the streets of Amsterdam for Paradiso. Also famous now, really classic designs made by people like Max Kisman. So I was really lucky to be able to work there after my graduation. And so this shop is not only important to me because of the technical facilities, but also in addition to that, Kees has a small publishing house where he creates screen prints made with artists that usually have a background in painting and drawing. And he found a way to incorporate the nature of the brushstroke into the screen printing process, like this one. This is a work by a painting by Roy Villevoix. I think it's 3 or 4 layers. And also he's capable of doing photographic reproduction with water-based inks, which is extremely difficult because it's still manual labor. That's something I'm not even considering to go there. And for those of you who don't really know what screen printing is about, it's a very simple and versatile technique. I'm not going to explain everything about it, but what you need is a screen that's reused over and over again, as long as you don't break it, in which a temporary stencil is being made. And the stencil is open, so what you literally do is pushing ink through a polyester mesh onto whatever you're printing on. And the tool that you need for printing that ink is called a squeegee. It's for paper, it's usually a strip of rubber. And one of the things that I like so much about screen printing is the fact that most of my work is done on a computer, but before going to actually execute it in screen printing, you need to close that computer, to finalize the design, go to film output, and once you enter the shop, you enter a world of ink and paper that enables you to change your mind, to change the color, to change the material that you're printing on, to change the following order. So the working process literally opens up again. And I always change my mind, and that's a good thing. And you can gain a lot of experience, but I think that's also my experience with working with students. Choosing the right color for the right job doesn't become any easier. I think people who get a taste for it think screen printing is fun, but I will never go to the print shop just for the hell of it, just to do something. I need a deadline. I need a specific reason to focus the time and the energy that is needed to bring all the ingredients together and get something done in the right way. So, but screen printing specifically enabled me to produce my own work at my own terms, relatively cheap, without being, without any dependence on other people. So, for example, I used it to print announcements for a series of cultural events I organized in the past, invitation cards connected to the festival in Chaumont a couple of years ago. So producing your own mailings. My own seasonal greetings. I'm not doing that anymore every year because the volume of cards just got way out of hand. But it's very satisfying to produce something physical that you can share with the world, that you can send to your relatives, to your friends, to your peers, to your colleagues, maybe clients. And this is the largest size I can do single-handedly. That's the A0. And I've been true to that size since my final exam. So it's a growing series. And altogether, these posters kind of become the biography of their maker. And it's like a line of comic drawings. I'm able to make new combinations all the time. But it's also become a catalog of printing strategies that I can use for education. And this is a small part of a small traveling exhibition. I think what's important, it's not so much about my work, but I use it to, what I think is important is that I can use the work to stimulate other people to pursue something in that direction as well. I'm interested in art. I read books about art. I go to museums, to galleries, but for my own personal work, I draw most inspiration from very humble sources, like the supermarket. Anybody ever been to the East Coast in the US, to New York? You know this girl? Okay, it's the logo of a potato chips brand. And I'm sure that you all know Kwik, Kwek and Kwak in Dutch. Donald Duck's nephews, yeah? Okay, one has a red hat, the other a blue one, and there's one with a green hat. Well, that's graphic design, right? That's visual coding. It's the same with this girl, because for every different flavor of potato chips, she has her cheeks are have a different color. And so I'm always looking for elements that have a certain openness and a sort of, or maybe there's a bit of humor involved. I'm constantly looking for elements that I can potentially use in the work, and making a cute girl vomit. This is in Montreal. I'm just walking the streets and look what's driving past by. Beautiful polar bear. And it may take 1 year or 5 years, but sooner or later those elements will find their place in a piece of work. This is a guy I ran into on the streets of Amsterdam. And I don't usually stop and photograph people. I'm a bit too shy. But when I came across this Arctic Hawaii shirt, I had no choice. And it became part of this poster. And of course, I'm an eager student of any print work that's out on the streets wherever I go. Of course, I bring a camera, but I look at this with a strictly technical eye. What halftone was used here? Is it screen print? Can I use that? And I've developed a strong preference for amateur graphic design, like these wrench signs in the western states of the US that are cut from metal sheets with some kind of torch, probably. And this piece particularly is an interesting combination of a script-like typography, native Indian elements, but also, like, you could call it like rural folklore with cowboys and cows and stuff like that. So it's a bit like a collage. And of course, I'm always looking for colors that I can potentially use in the work. These are cakes found in a supermarket in Boston. To give you a better idea of how I usually work, 2 years ago I was on a tour visiting a series of art colleges and universities in Canada and the US, northeastern part. And I was looking for a visual metaphor to illustrate that, to make a poster about that tour. And suddenly I recalled, you probably know the table soccer games, right? Tafelvoetbal. Well, in the US they have something similar, but then it's ice hockey, and then it's covered with a plexiglass dome. It's a really beautiful object. So I thought, well, of course, ice hockey. That's like the Holland-Germany soccer match. It's a classic. And as soon as you start Googling for ice hockey, you come across these jerseys that are instant recipe for color, for typography, for graphic shapes. And if you Google a little bit more, it seems that every sports team in North America needs aggressive animal as a logo. And it doesn't really matter if it's ice hockey or football or what else is there, baseball. And so before you know it, you're involved in a type of research. I mean, it's not academic research, but who invented these logos, and why is it so that so many people adapt to the rules that seem to exist about how such animals should be stylized, how those colors should be chosen. And it might have something to do with the fact that many of these logos are used for embroidery or screen prints on coffee mugs and bumper stickers and stuff like that. But so I'm looking for potential building blocks. I'm a very opportunistic researcher in that respect, because I'm looking for ingredients that kind of talk together. So while I'm looking for ingredients for a particular design, ideas start popping up and I can start sketching. Also, what does an ice hockey ring actually look like? And how does it relate to the A0 size? So I spend a lot of time collecting the ingredients for a design, not knowing what will come out of it. And all these pictures you find in Google, of course, are low-res images that you cannot manipulate for color separations. So all those elements need to be redrawn in Illustrator, made into sharp graphics that can be separated and rescaled, etc. And while I'm working with these objects, I'm looking for ways, I'm looking for little storylines to create something out of it. But it's like a small adventure. Also typography. Recently I had to do a little bit of page layout, and I never developed any ideas about how book pages or magazine pages should look, so I kind of panic. For me, typography is connected to illustration, so from that point of view, I'm always looking for typography that has a strong expressive qualities. And while I'm collecting all these elements, I also have to make up my mind about how many layers I'm going to print and in what colors I'm going to print. So once all those elements find their place in the two-dimensional plane, usually there's a lot of layers involved just to stay in control of all those separate elements. It's time to take everything apart vertically and create black and white color separations that I need to expose the actual screens. And especially with a complex design like this one, it's very easy to make mistakes. So for me there's only one way to do corrections, and that's by making black and white laser prints on transparent sheets of paper, overlay them on a small light table, and to see if the whole construction of the print is in order. And as you can see, there's many flaws to be taken out. Okay, so when the films are ready, it's time to go to the shop, choose the colors, mix the colors, start printing. This is after black, red, and opaque white. The gray that you see is white on top of black. And the final layer, blue, and then the print is finished. And like you guys, I'm working with water-based inks, made in Belgium by Unico. Very good stuff. And but it's a water-based studio, and I work with very cheap films, so that means that every stage of the process, the material is influenced by the moisture in the air and the air temperature. So even if you want it to be super precise, it's impossible. And but I'm not even trying anymore. I just accept that that's part of the deal, and I'm even trying to encourage those little imprecisions, because I think they add a certain dynamic and warmth to the work. So it's not offset, it's not the same. Screen printing also proved to be a way to change gallery spaces in a relatively cheap and fast way. This is part of a show in Eindhoven at the Van Abbe Museum, where I collaborated with Jennifer Tay, printing white ink on black sheets of paper that were sewn together with industrial sewing machines, and after that were cut partly, creating a wall space inside the gallery. Printing on white sheets of cotton is not so different compared to printing on white sheets of paper. It's technically a little bit different. But once you have 10 or 20 or 30 meters of fabric, a pattern, you can also cut it apart, sew it together, and make a new construction out of it. So I also like to I like the modular aspect of the printing. Keeping in mind that something new, something bigger can come out of a half product. And so far I've only had the experience to work with a fashion designer once. This is the work by Alexander van Slobbe, who asked me to do a print design for what was supposed to be an evening dress. And it's one of the few occasions where another designer treated my work like I treat all those anonymous logos that I pick up from Google. And I must say that was a new sensation. So when I came to the fashion show, there was no evening dress, but those patterns were made for blouses and petticoats. And occasionally I have a budget or gallery shows or museum shows have a budget for outdoor publicity. And well, if you're going to print a huge MUPI-size posters like this, you might as well consider to print a little bit more and to treat the print as raw material that you can create something three-dimensional out of. And I think the most permanent version of screen printing must be screen printing connected to architecture. Thursday I'm going to do a presentation for one of the new subway stations in Amsterdam, but I'm not sure yet if they grant me the job, so that would be great. It's just a sketch. The last project in that vein is a swimming pool in close to Utrecht. Huge window panes, 2 by 2.5 meters, that were screen printed in opaque white and a transparent paste. And yeah, well, the work, I spent a lot of time doing those drawings and preparing the whole project, but it's going to be there for at least 20 years, so it's also worth the trouble. And screen printing can also be the subject for a show, like in Milan 2 years ago, where I kind of schematically recreated a screen printing environment as part of a gallery show about graphic design. I'm heavily influenced by art from Asian countries, and to be more specific, art from Japan. I think you all know this picture, the big wave by Hokusai, which has become a well-known icon that kind of represents the whole world of traditional wood cutting in Japan. And I'm sure you've all seen the pictures with the geisha, the beautiful girls and the actors and stuff like that. What I like about Hokusai in particular is that his Hokusai manga, his so-called involuntary drawings, in which he's trying to depict his entire environment. And that's also the work that the current term manga for animations and that particular type of comics are derived from. And when I was about to become a student in art school, there was a symposium in The Hague called Japan-Holland, a combination of Dutch and Japanese designers presenting themselves. And that was the first time that I saw work from Asia that had no practical function, but were merely objects of art with a completely different purpose than our so-called stopping power posters announcing a theater show or a rock concert or whatever. And I'm not an expert, but I've really studied that work, and I'm also trying to work in that vein. This is the work by Kazumasa Nagai. He's in his 70s now, and it's a good example of how you can combine the sharpness of the vector line with the warmth of personal handwriting, in his case etching. And you may know Tadanori Yoko, who is of course one of the absolute kings of collage technique. 2 years ago he had a big show in Osaka with all his posters. If you can get a hold of this book, you can still order it through Amazon Japan. It's really fantastic. And last time I was in Japan myself, I was working on a project around Japanese candy packaging as a source of communication and information. Unfortunately, there's no time tonight to really elaborate on that show. What I'm trying to do is, like, I wasn't raised in Japan. I'm a Dutch guy from the polder with a strong affinity for that culture, so there's no need for me to be subject to those traditions. I'm trying to create my own tradition in that respect. But I'm trying to combine elements from that world that I like with elements from our European world. Unfortunately, people who sleep with others may know this brand. Unfortunately, like many other companies, they changed a fantastic logo. Those two lovebirds. It's something really boring now. And when you combine those elements, this is a wedding invitation for friends. Especially the guy, Richard, used to like to talk about sex. So the perfect occasion to work with the condom logo, of course. I think what a lot of my work comes down to is that I like to play with graphic elements, and I like also to play with visual cliches, like how much more cliche can a piece of work be? 2 wedding rings, blue for the boy, pink for the girl. Yeah, that's everything you need to be a designer, if you ask me. And I'm sure that Ghent has a Chinese food store, or maybe even a Japanese food store. Did you ever try this mayonnaise? Okay, well, fortunately, you have your own Belgian mayonnaise tradition, which is already much better than the Dutch sweet stuff. But Japanese mayonnaise is even worse. It tastes like nothing. But the bottle is really interesting because it's very soft. And when you squeeze the bottle, it's like pinching a soft, juicy baby arm. You should try it. And a lot of people think that this little character here is a Japanese invention, but it's not. It was designed in the 30s in the US. It's called Kewpie. It's like a little Cupido. And yeah, if you start Googling for mayonnaise and takeout food, you come across these. Can you imagine your girlfriend or your wife wearing this to stimulate your sexual life? Anyway, so this is, I'm constantly looking for building blocks that have a certain openness, that appeal to me, that can become a little character in a new scene, in a new story. As much as I love Japan and other Asian countries, I think I have the strongest connection with North America. I'm really in love with the landscape and with the natural resources there. And it's not a miracle that it also shows in the work. Whenever I can, whenever a school in the US invites me to do a workshop or a lecture, I try to extend my stay and to spend time traveling, exploring the country. I really like the driving there, but it doesn't mean that I like all aspects of driving. I'm really appalled by all the dead animals you see, especially in the western states, all the dead deer and the dead skunks. And last spring I was part of a group show around the American landscape. And for me that was an occasion to combine some of my completely amateur travel photography with material from archives. This is a photograph from the American Museum of Natural History in New York. If you haven't been there, it's warmly recommended. You can easily spend 2 days there, full. And the museum is well known for its beautiful dioramas. This is a picture from the 50s, where one of the museum designers is trying to figure out how to, in a scale model, of course, how to place the actual stuffed bison in the museum. And this is how it's combined, printed in black and brown, combined with the very particular graphic language of American traffic signs. And I'm sure you've all heard of Buffalo Bill, who is one of the people who took show business to the next level, end of the 19th century. And he was so famous that when he performed in Europe, this is a poster for a show in France, that they didn't even have to print his name or his show, because his picture was already enough. He was one of the first worldwide celebrities in that respect. And well, when you're researching about Buffalo, there's also an American football team in the city of Buffalo, upstate New York. And of course, like any sports team, the Buffalo Bills have their own cheerleaders that are dressed in these typical Americana outfits. And I take an interest in all those aspects, so I think my interest shifted from pure graphic design to sources that are connected to that. And I'm pretty positive that you've all seen the Obama campaign poster done by Shepard Fairey. And what I think is kind of curious is that Shepard Fairey was influenced by propaganda posters from Russia, and he found a way to kind of render this existing photograph of Obama and use overprint and make a translation and make it something unique. And what I think is really disappointing is that so many other people, if you Google for Obama campaign poster, you see a lot of rip-offs where people just regard it as a mere style. And yeah, I personally, I think it should be every designer or illustrator or artist's goal to create his or her own handwriting. And where's the fun in imitating? Okay, but enough complaining. If you bring all these elements together, this is what could come out of it. It's like an election poster. And here, this is the poster in that exhibition space. It's again in Utrecht, in a place connected to the Centraal Museum. And once the posters are done, it's just a little bit of extra effort to create something, a border around it. This is the billboard in front of the Rietveld Academy that Kees and me use as a showcase for what can be done in the screen printing shop. I spent a lot of time sitting on my ass behind the computer screen, probably like many of you. And it's convenient to live in the city. You know, I can do a lot of things on my bicycle. I don't need to own a car. It's convenient. Shops are close by, but a couple of times a year, the city completely drives me crazy, and I just have to get out. And that's one of the reasons why I like traveling through North America so much, because it's still possible there to find things that are rarer and rarer in urban environments. And what I'm thinking of is silence, solitude, darkness, seeing wildlife close by. And especially when you travel off-season, because in the summer holidays the parks are super crowded with Americans. I don't want to be there. But especially in the fall or in the spring, it's not so busy, and there's time to chat with rangers about whatever occurs there. And I tremendously enjoy backpacking and just being out there away from my desk. But, you know, I'm not a nature photographer, I'm not a poet. I don't find divine inspiration walking beneath those trees. What I actually need is what happens between those natural areas and the city, because I'm always looking for a graphic representation of reality that I can actually use in that graphic work. And my life is not always that fantastic. I mean, there's years that there's no money to fly me across the ocean, and that's where I started to do long distance cycling in Europe. Just dragging along my camping gear. This is a place in somewhere between the major rivers in Holland. And sure, there's nice traffic signs in Holland as well, and the rest of Europe. But the sign that you come across most of the time is this one. And because every square meter seems to be owned by something or somebody. And so often I feel like this sheep here, desperately wanting to get to the green stuff, but stuck in the grit. And like I said, screen printing as an activity can be a lot of fun. How are we doing time-wise? Fantastic. I think if it wouldn't have been for screen printing, I would have been bored with graphic design some time ago. I really like the physical aspect about it. Working in the shop, doing physical labor, getting tired, getting your hands dirty, working with actual materials. And there's great satisfaction to that, in addition to all the digital life. And in its core, screen printing is a super simple technique. But you get more out of it once you start to think of negative space combined with positive space. And that's something that I'm trying to get across whenever I'm conducting workshops. So that's also something that we're going to spend time doing in a few weeks here. So if you learn how to work with negative space and combine it with opaque inks and transparent inks, then you're screen printing. And once you get your brain around that, there's a world of endless possibilities. And that's why I'm still interested in doing it. Also, there's the aspect of how to translate some material that cannot be translated in a pure graphic way. So you need photographic halftones or otherwise. You can use the technique of masking by just covering anything that's underneath. Also, I think that the use of opaque white is one of the major qualities of screen printing, even of water-based screen printing, because it enables you to literally bring back the color of the paper, pushing away whatever's underneath, and using masking techniques. So when I started out being a designer, I imagined to work for clients much more. I still work for clients, but most of the time I'm involved in education. This is a workshop in Strasbourg, where the shop was not water-based yet. Fantastic to work with solvent-based inks, but ooh, the headaches late at night and skin rashes, horrible. It's not worth the trouble. This is a masterclass in Amsterdam, a place called Grafisch Atelier Amsterdam, where I was trying to teach a couple of people that also already showed affinity with the process to take it to the next level, work on a bigger scale. This is Kunsthochschule Kassel, and really fancy equipment. I'm really jealous. I wish I had one of those tables. Made in Germany, of course. But there's always something wrong, you know, it's never perfect. There's always an element of improvisation. This is Mulhouse, also working with solvents. And yeah, the traveling to those places feeds the work, and I'm still willing to go anywhere. People think that I can play a useful role. And a few years ago, my former teacher, Kees, asked me if I would be interested to join him running the screen printing shop for paper at my old school, the Rietveld. And it took me a while to get adapted to that type of work because, well, my ego is not that big, but, you know, working in a place like that, my role is I'm completely of service to the students there. That's something completely different. And students often are very, well, let's say, not so well organized, or maybe even messy, dirty. And it took me a while, it took me like half a year to get used to that whole situation, but now I tremendously enjoy it because I realized that working with students that that are new to the technique, have no fixed way of approaching that technique, also come up with a lot of great and spontaneous ideas that I may benefit from. So I think now it's more a discussion that goes in two directions. This is one of the most talented people that graduated recently, Johan Kauth, a student from Germany, who is doing manual split fountain printing, irisdruk in Nederlands, the whole rainbow in one stroke. And I don't expect any of the students I work with to become master printers at all, but I think I have a good nose for talent. And when students are into it, I try to encourage them to, to walk the extra mile and do extra work, and also make use of the fact that we have a platform outside of the school for experimentations. And I'm particularly proud when the students use our shop to produce the poster that announces the final graduation show, because there's so much commercial junk out of the streets of Amsterdam, and I'm really happy to play a tiny little role in stimulating graphic culture in general and printing culture in particular, working there. And that's the end of my talk. Dank je wel.
What's the maximum of layers we use for a poster? Or project?
It depends on the material that I'm printing on, but it's also a matter of time and money. Because in other shops I've seen productions done for visual art, it's like 30 layers. Yeah, of course it's going to be rich and beautiful, it's going to be like a painting, but think of all the time and money involved to produce a print with 30 layers. It's incredible. So I think for me the challenge is to make the most of limited means and work with, suggest more by being smart, and work with transparent colors that make a third printing color. That in Dutch it's called overdruk, in the Nederlandse taal, overprinting. I can show you some examples. And time is always limited. I mean, I wish I could spend weeks working on one print, but I kind of lose it. You lose momentum. I like the fact that there's always a certain pressure involved. There's only a limited amount of time to get something done, and then do it in that period, and then move on to the next project. I like the energy of it, more than a perfectly executed print with thousands of layers.
It did look perfect though.
Of course, yeah, but it's a different... I like to be between what I call ghetto style and technical perfection. I'm aware of both ends. I'm too much a perfectionist to be ghetto style. I'm too much punk mentality still, if you may call it like that, to be so into the technical. Perfection can be also very boring because it leaves no space, if you ask me.
If you ask me, better business.
And it's not easy to do perfect work either. So, yeah. Anything else?
Yeah.
What kind of mesh size do you use?
Most of the time 120 T. Yeah,
Also for gold and silver?
No, 90, because metallics prove to be very hard to print with 120. Yeah, frustratingly difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever been in touch with people whose work you use? Do you sometimes send it back to them again?
Yeah, I'm trying to make a habit out of, like when I used the photograph from the Museum of Natural History, I sent them a print. I would love the feedback. And also, sometimes I borrow somebody's logo, and if I know who the designer is, I always will send them a print. People are lazy, distracted, they have other stuff to do, you know. It's
never gone beyond that. There's never been a long collaboration with someone.
Well, I did a poster with Ed Vella. You know Ed Vella? Okay. I would love to do it again, but it's hard to find the time. there's a big distance. It's not easy to collaborate, but there's the potential. Yeah.
Has it ever gone badly where someone sees that you use their work and it's not negatively?
No, often students ask me about, aren't you concerned about using commercial logos in your work, like the Bibendum, the Michelin logo? But I think as long as you're not trying to make a profit, reappropriating those logos, my work is just small scale. It happens in arena of art and culture. I'm not a threat commercially. So, and besides, all that commercial visual information is pushed into our lives day in, day out. So it's part of our environment. It's part of our daily life. I feel completely free to take it and use it for my own purposes. Why not? But I'm very hesitant to. You can't use Hergé's work.
Just try.
Yeah.
Try.
Yeah. Or if you're in China and if you're trying to copy Apple Store, of course you'll be in trouble because Apple's lawyers will be in your breathing in your neck. I don't think a lot of people just don't pay attention. They don't even notice. It takes educated people with a specific interest to kind of dissect. In that respect, we're in the right place. To dissect the work and to actually read what's in the design. That's only a handful of people that have a similar line of interest. So there's no risk there. But what I do, I think, is no different than what musicians do who use samples. It's exactly the same. So, yeah. Anything else? Or shall we? Okay. Please.
I don't know exactly what to ask, but your work appears very decorative.
Mm-hmm. Is that bad?
No. Do you work with a specific system? I mean, when you make a composition for a poster, do you have something in mind? Do you try to use symbolism in the way you arrange icons around the material, the elements around the poster? And have you ever received critique for this decorative thing? I mean, not that I find it bad, but I'm curious as a student because I like the use of it, but you usually receive critique from being.
Yeah. Well, I only have to look around at what's happening at the Rietveld Academy, what students are busy with at the moment, and there seems to be a lot of theory and a lot of typographic work. But I'm aware of other approaches to graphic design. But I think as an individual you also need to be realistic. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I think that it's also important that you just follow whatever you like to do or whatever your qualities lie, and that's different for every individual. So personally, I'm not very easily excited by the dry academic text-based work that allows you or that forces you to read like huge amounts of text in order to get the message across. Because I'm simply into a more intuitive visual language. So in that respect, I'm just following my heart. And I'm using a material that appeals to me, and the work that comes out of it is a what do you call it? It's a mixture of those influences. And I think by doing what I'm doing, I can play a tiny little role in graphic design because it has more to do with humor and enthusiasm and the material qualities of the work rather than I'm not stupid, you know, I'm fairly smart, but it doesn't mean that. And I don't think that the work may be decorational. Yeah, it's fun to look at, but I'm proud when people hang it in their bedrooms or wherever, because there's so many details involved and there's a lot of stuff to see. But it just, I just grew into something like that. I'm trying to have fun and trying to create something that I can relate to myself, that is fun to look at, also in 5 years or maybe longer. Because it's simply the outcome of what draws my attention in the world. And I think at the moment, a lot of graphic design is too much depending on thinking. I miss a lot of enthusiasm or directness at a more I like to speak through the senses. I like to use my senses. And while I'm doing that, I'm also using my intellect. But you know what I mean? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's not easy to find your own voice. And sometimes I feel like I'm completely out of tune with whatever's going on in graphic design, but what can you do but be true to yourself? If once you've found your own voice, and apparently this is my voice. So, shall we turn on one more question and then turn on the lights? 2 more questions. Okay. Ladies first. Okay. Well, you get more time. Sorry.
Yeah, so I noticed in your designs that your earlier works, they look like you look down at the earth from the sky. And further in your career, it looks like you change your view with the world. How do you think that comes? Is it
in what way?
Like, first everything is like looking down from a plane at the earth, like some more like topographical view.
Yeah.
And furthermore, I see your works kind of look like you look your own eyes at the world. I think that is because you look at the world in a way, or?
I think it's. I never looked at it that way. So that's an interesting observation. I was really eager to leave that world of cartography because I thought the people there were just too boring, and I couldn't imagine a life working within all those rules. So I was literally looking for more freedom of expression when I went to art school. But the whole concept of map making, of mapping your world, that's an important part of the work still, because I spend a lot of time. I spend more time looking for ingredients that are kind of part of a certain atmosphere or domain, like the ice hockey poster. And then the design is easy because the elements kind of design themselves. So in a way, you're completely right. I'm still producing maps, but I'm also obsessed with detail. So maybe I'm not sure where I am at the moment. I don't think about it too much, but maybe those things kind of mix together. It's very hard. In each poster or other piece of work I'm making, I'm trying to put the entire world in it, but of course that's impossible. So that's what deadlines are for.
Yeah, but I think it's because first everything's like you can change the paper and you can see everything.
Yeah.
But after a while it's more from top to bottom. Like this design is more. It's a different view.
Yeah. But that might change any day. I just made a sketch for the sketch proposal for a floor, 7 meters wide, 130 meters long in natural stone, in tiles. Huge drawing. And I'm looking at 17th century bird eye view maps of the world. And for example, there's a beautiful map of Amsterdam it's etching where you can see every house, every ship. You can see little people working, building ships. That's the stuff that draws me. That I think that's fantastic. I wish I could do something like that. Tracing all that shit in Illustrator. Yeah. Okay, over here.
My question was, you enjoy what you're doing a lot and you spend a lot of time in thinking, but are you always satisfied with the result?
No, of course not. I've made plenty of crap earlier in my working life that I'm not showing tonight, of course. But I think it's necessary to make a lot of shit as well, because it helps you to evaluate and move on and learn from it. So I think especially when you're a student or just starting a career, it's important to not to be afraid to make mistakes, but just produce a lot of stuff. And it doesn't really matter if it's analog work or digital work, but it's the only way to understand what works for you, or what satisfies you, or what you think is worth spending your time with. And I think the major challenge of, especially when you're working alone, if you don't have a partner, or if you're not part of a group or a gang or whatever, designing, working alone can be a lonesome affair for much of the time. So it's not so easy to find your own voice in the first place, and then it's not easy to become inspired. But when you are inspired, it's not so easy to stay inspired. Because for a lot of people, graphic design is like a daytime job. They're glad when they can leave the office at 6 and go back to their real interests. In my case, it's hard to divide because I'm trying to choose my jobs. I'm trying only to say yes to clients that I think are worth the trouble. I don't always succeed, of course. But there's a couple of things. I mean, for the first time in 10 years, I made advertisements for Facebook, but also for newspapers. And I can do that. It's just a couple of hours, but for me, it feels like homework, because I think I should do other stuff. But yeah, sometimes I just say yes to it because it's part of a larger package. I can also do a catalog and a poster. It's fine. Does that answer your question? Okay.